Chapter 1. The Forge's Shadow. Kael Drayce was 22 when the smoke stopped rising from the Iron Hollow, a soot-choked valley where his family had forged steel for generations. He'd been a striker, swinging hammers beside his father Gavin until the bellows fell silent. That morning, Kael woke to ash dusting his cot and a stillness that gnawed at him. The forge, a hulking beast of brick and iron, stood cold. His father was gone, along with half the crew, vanished into the Hollow's mines, chasing a vein they'd bragged would bleed molten gold. All Kael found was a hammer, its head etched with a jagged rune, left on the forge floor. Iron Hollow wasn't much, a cluster of 300 souls wedged between slag heaps and rusted cranes, ringed by cliffs that trapped the smog. The mines burrowed deep, their tunnels a maze of ore and whispers. Folks said the Hollow was alive, its heart a furnace that demanded sweat and blood. Kael scoffed at that growing up. Superstition, he'd thought. Now, with the forge dead and the air tasting of rust, he wasn't so sure. He bunked with Tante Rees, a flint-eyed smith widow who'd raised him after his mother bolted. She shoved a bowl of gruel at him, her voice like gravel. "They're gone, boy. Let it lie, or it'll take you too." Kael gripped the hammer, rune glinting faintly. "Not yet," he said, and started packing. Rope, a lantern, a pick. The Hollow's cliffs loomed, and from their peaks a faint red glow pulsed like embers under ash. Chapter 2. The Descent Begins. Kael hit the mines at dusk, the glow his guide. The air thickened with dust, the tunnels narrowing until he had to hunch. His lantern flickered, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Half a mile in, he found a shaft, ropes frayed, tools scattered, and a smear of blood drying on the wall. The rune on his hammer warmed, itching his palm. He swung it at a cracked timber, and a low groan echoed back. Not wind, but something alive. He should have turned back, but Kael was forged stubborn. He rappelled down, boots scraping stone, until he landed in a cavern vast as a cathedral. Stalactites dripped slag, and at the center glowed a pit, molten, shimmering, its surface rippling like liquid iron. Around it lay bodies, miners, smiths, his father among them, faces locked in screams, hands clutching runes that matched his hammers. A voice rasped from the pit, "Feed me," and Kael stumbled back, heart hammering. Chapter 3. The Rune's Call. Kael hauled himself out, hammer heavier now, and collapsed at Tante Rees's door. "They're dead," he choked, showing her the rune. She traced it, eyes narrowing. "That's a warden's mark. Old pact. Feed the Hollow. Keep it quiet. Your da broke it." She handed him a ledger, pages brittle from the first smiths. "The iron heart wakes when the forge starves. Runes bind it. Blood stokes it." Kael read, dread coiling. The glow pulsed brighter that night, and the cliffs trembled. He returned at dawn, hammer in hand, and tossed a scrap of steel into the pit. It sank, the glow flared, and the voice purred, "More." The rune burned his palm, sinking with the pulse. Back in the village, folks noticed. Cranes creaked alive, slag heaps smoked. "What'd you do, Drayce?" growled Vor, a burly crane operator. Kael squared up. "Woke something. It's hungry." Chapter 4. The First Forge. Kael didn't wait for permission. He fired up the forge, hammering scrap into bars, the rune guiding his strikes. Each piece he tossed into the pit dimmed the glow, steadied the cliffs. Word spread. Smiths trickled in, wary but curious. Sigrid, a wiry welder who'd lost her brother to the mines, joined first. "For gens," she muttered, tossing a rod. The pit swallowed it, and the forge flared hotter. They worked in shifts, a rhythm of sweat and steel. Vor came next, dragging a crane hook, then Tully, a kid with quick hands and a limp from a cave-in. The rune pulsed in Kael's grip, a heartbeat under the noise. Ore piled up at the mine mouth, rich, gleaming, and the village buzzed, but the pit's voice grew sharper. Not enough. Chapter 5. The Hollow Stirs. The forge roared for weeks, but the glow crept back, brighter, angrier. One night, a crane buckled, pinning Tully under steel. Kael pried him free, but the kid's leg was smashed. "It's mad," Tully gasped, and Kael saw it. Cracks splitting the cliffs, ash raining thick. Vor cornered him at dawn. "You're killing us, Drayce. Shut it down." Kael spat back. "Then why's the ore flowing? Why are we eating?" The pit answered. A tremor shook the Hollow, and a miner's corpse washed up from the mines, rune-carved, eyes gone. The ledger mentioned a deeper chamber, the Heart Forge. Kael rallied Sigrid and Vor. Lanterns lit. "We find it. We fix this." They descended, the air scorching, the voice a roar. "Give." Chapter 6. The Heart Forge. The tunnel twisted, walls glowing red, until they hit a forge. Massive, ancient, its anvil cracked but alive with heat. A second pit yawned beside it, dark as pitch, sucking light. Kael tossed a bar. It vanished, and the red pit dimmed while the black flared. "2 hearts," Sigrid muttered. One eats, one binds. The rune on Kael's hammer split, half glowing red, half black. They fed both, steel to the red, slag to the black, and the cliff stilled. The voice split too, snarling and soothing. Back topside, the crew grew, 50, then 100. Smiths, miners, kids, hauling fuel. Tante Rees forged Kael a second hammer, black-runed. "Balance it, or we're ash," she warned. The hollow hummed, alive but leashed. Chapter 7, The Warden's Price. Months passed, the forge churned, ore flowed, and the village thrived. Cranes tall, slag heaps shrinking. Kael split the crew, Sigrid on the red pit, Vor on the black. He worked both, hammers pulsing, runes scarring his hands. The voice quieted, but one dusk, the black pit surged, swallowing a crane arm. Kael carved his initials into a steel plate, tossed it in. The pit settled, but his runes bled, a slow drip. He climbed the cliffs that night, hammers crossed, watching the glows sink. The hollow wasn't dying, it was waking, and Kael was its warden now, not by choice but by need. "Price of keeping," he grunted, forging on. Chapter 8, The Iron Pact. The crew swelled to 200, a legion of soot and steel. They dubbed themselves Hollow Wardens, each bearing a rune, red or black. Kael mapped the mines, found veins deeper than ever, and split the haul. Half to trade, half to feed the pits. One dawn, a figure emerged from the red glow. Gavin, ash-streaked, hammer in hand. "You held it, son," he rasped, handing Kael a rune-etched gauntlet. "Wear it." He faded, and the pits purred. Kael donned it, the rune fusing to his scars. The forge blazed, the cliffs stood firm, and the voice slept, mostly. The hollow watched, and Kael stared back, hammers ready. Epilogue, the hollow's pulse. Years on, Iron Hollow thrummed. Forges hot, mines rich, wardens vigilant. Kael stood atop the cliffs, gauntlet glowing, scars a map of his pact. The pits burned steady, red and black, a heartbeat under the earth. The village wasn't just surviving, it was iron, and Kael was its spine. The voice whispered sometimes, but he'd forged it silent. For now,